I moved into the building on a Tuesday. Rainy day. The kind of rain that makes your shoelaces heavy and your breath visible, even though it's not really cold, just damp in a way that makes everything feel a little used. The apartment was nothing special, but it was mine. A small one-bedroom on the third floor of a post-war block that had been renovated just enough to be charming in the listings. Cracked tiles in the hallway, yellowed wallpaper that curled at the corners, and that faint, unshakable smell of boiled cabbage and something metallic, like old coins left in water too long. It was perfect for someone starting over. I didn't have much to move in, just a futon, a couple of suitcases, and a sense that I needed to be somewhere new. No dramatic reason, just a quiet ache to reset. The first person I met in the building was Mr. Volkov. Or at least, that's what he told me his name was. He was standing by the stairwell as I lugged my boxes up. Thin man, maybe in his late 50s, dressed in slacks and a beige sweater that looked ironed. Neat haircut. Not a speck of stubble. He looked like the kind of man who used coasters even when he was alone. "Moving in?" he asked in a calm, lilting voice. No smile, but not unfriendly either. "Yeah," I puffed. "Apartment 3C. Ah. Across from me. I'm in 3B. We stood there for a second. He didn't offer to help, and I didn't expect him to. He just nodded slightly, the way people do when they think that's the end of a conversation. But just as I turned to go up the last few steps, he said, "That door, yours, it doesn't quite close right unless you lift the handle before turning the key." "Thanks," I said, and he nodded again, disappearing into his apartment without another word. No sound of a lock clicking. Just the soft whump of a door that fit perfectly in its frame. I didn't think anything of it. Just a neighbor being neighborly. It wasn't until much later that I realized I never saw him carrying groceries. Never heard a TV from his apartment. Never even saw him open his door. But that day, all I saw was a man who lived across from me. Clean, quiet, helpful. Normal. At least, he seemed normal. The days that followed were a blur of unpacking and rearranging furniture that didn't quite fit the way I imagined. The apartment creaked at night, like most old places do, wood adjusting, pipes shifting, wind slipping through the window seams. I told myself I'd get used to it. Mr. Volkov became a sort of hallway fixture. I'd see him now and then, never coming or going, just appearing. Usually near the mailboxes in the lobby, or sometimes by the stairwell on our floor. Always the same posture, hands gently clasped behind his back, as though he'd just been standing there waiting for a reason to speak. "Getting used to the place?" he'd ask. "Yeah," I'd say. "Still feels a little like a hotel room, but I'll settle in." He'd nod at that. That was his thing, nodding, tilting his head just slightly like he was filing the response away. "You'll find the noises get familiar," he said once. "Eventually you stop noticing them." He had a way of speaking that was deliberate. Pauses between thoughts, like he was measuring each word. It wasn't unsettling exactly, just very still. Once we ended up by the mailboxes at the same time. He asked if I'd met anyone else in the building yet. "Not really," I said. "Haven't seen many people around. They keep to themselves. Good people, mostly. Quiet." I made a joke about how that was perfect, since I wasn't great with noise or unexpected visitors. He chuckled, not loudly, but just enough to acknowledge the effort. Then he said, "It's a place for people who want to be left alone." There was something about the way he said it that hung in the air a second longer than it should have. Not threatening. Just final. We stood in silence while I pretended to sort through junk mail. He didn't check his box. Just stood there with me. Then, just as suddenly, he turned and walked back upstairs, not saying goodbye. It occurred to me only later. He was wearing the same beige sweater. Same neatly pressed slacks. Every time I'd seen him, his clothes hadn't changed. I told myself it was probably his lounging outfit. Everyone's got one. Hell, I wear the same hoodie 3 days in a row if I'm not going out. But even then, I noticed it. A part of me didn't want to. About a week after I moved in, I started noticing the hall light just outside my door would flicker at odd times. Not constantly, just for a second or two. A quick dimming, then back to normal. I figured it was a loose bulb or faulty wiring. Old buildings are full of those little annoyances. But it always seemed to flicker when I stepped out or came back in. Like the timing was off just enough to feel deliberate. I asked the super about it. He just grunted and said, "Yeah, that light's always been fussy." But the way he said it, without even looking up from his clipboard, made it feel more like he didn't want to talk about it. One night, around 11, I stepped into the hallway to take some trash down. That's when I saw Mr. Volkov standing at the far end of the corridor, near the emergency exit. He wasn't moving. Just standing there in that same posture, hands behind his back, staring at the red glow of the exit sign like it was telling him something. I hesitated. "You all right, Mr. Volkov?" He turned his head slowly, not startled, just aware of me now. "Yes," he said. "Just thinking. Lot to think about at this hour." I joked. That time, he didn't chuckle. He walked past me without a word, heading toward his apartment. The smell of his cologne lingered, old-fashioned, like cedar and something almost sweet underneath. Familiar in a way I couldn't place. Then he stopped just short of his door, glanced back at me and said, "Be careful taking out the trash. The chute sometimes opens, unexpectedly." That threw me. I hadn't mentioned where I was going. I mean, sure, the trash bag was a giveaway, but something about the way he said it, it felt like a correction. Like he already knew, and just wanted me to know he knew. After he went inside, I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, watching his door. I waited for the sound of a lock clicking, footsteps, anything. But there was nothing. No sound. No movement. The hallway light flickered once. Then steadied. I went down to the trash room with that strange pressure in my chest that comes when something doesn't quite make sense but isn't scary enough to call out loud. Yet. A few days later, I came home from work around 6. The sun was just setting, casting that amber light through the windows in the stairwell, the kind that makes dust float like tiny insects in the air. Everything was quiet. It usually was. Our floor didn't get much foot traffic. As I was unlocking my door, I heard the soft sound of a latch moving. I looked up and saw Mr. Volkov's door slightly ajar. Not wide open, just cracked an inch or two. Enough to see the warm yellow glow from a lamp inside. No TV sounds. No music. Then, quietly, he said, "Evening." I hadn't seen him open the door. I stepped back a bit and said, "Evening," with a nod. We stood there for a moment, separated by the narrow corridor and our half-closed doors. Then he said, "You're settling in well. I don't hear you moving around much." That caught me off guard. I wasn't loud, but I didn't think I was silent either. "Yeah," I tried to be respectful. "These walls aren't exactly thick." He hummed, like he appreciated that, and then asked, "Do you dream, Mr. Clark?" I blinked. "Sorry?" "Dreams. Nightmares. Do you remember them?" It was the first time he used my name. I hadn't told him it. I tried to play it cool. "Not really. Just vague stuff, I guess." "Good," he said, still calm. "It's best when they fade before morning." Then the door clicked shut. Slowly. Carefully. No lock sound. No footsteps. Just silence. I stood there for another minute, trying to figure out if I should knock. Ask why he said that. But what would I even say? "Hey, are you trying to weird me out?" Instead, I went inside and made a sandwich. Tried to shake it off. But later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about how quietly his door closed. Like he didn't move at all. Like it had just drifted shut on its own. The last normal day, I didn't know it at the time, was a Sunday. I'd finally cleared enough space in my living room to set up the small bookcase I'd dragged with me from my last apartment. I spent most of the morning unpacking boxes labeled miscellaneous, and wondering why I owned so many extension cords. Around noon, I opened the window to let in some air. The breeze was sharp, but not cold. From my spot, I could just make out the back courtyard, a concrete square with 3 dying trees and a couple of rusted benches. No one ever sat out there. That afternoon, I saw Mr. Volkov again. Just outside his door, standing like he always did, hands behind his back, chin tilted slightly down. Like he'd been waiting for me to come out. This time, he asked about my family. Are they close by? He said. Not really. A few states over. You live alone then? Yeah, I said, hesitating just a beat too long. Just me. He nodded. That's good. I raised an eyebrow. Why's that? But he just smiled. A thin, almost imperceptible curve of the lips. Less noise. Fewer distractions. The building stays quieter that way. He paused, then added, You ever notice how loud the old pipes get when people are unhappy? It was such a weird thing to say. I gave a polite laugh, trying to pass it off. I'll take your word for it. He didn't laugh with me. Just stared for a second longer than felt natural. Then he turned and went inside. But this time, when the door closed, I caught something. A smell like mildew and something else. Something sour. Not strong, barely noticeable, but wrong. Like fruit that had just started to rot under the sink. It came from the gap in his door. Just for a second. Then it was gone. That night, I dreamed of the hallway outside my apartment. Only it wasn't empty. I was staring at Mr. Volkov's door, and I could hear whispering from behind it. Not in English. Not even in a language I could place. Just low murmurs, like breath being pulled through teeth. When I woke up, the hallway light outside my apartment was on. And flickering. It started with Mrs. Dirin. She lived on the second floor, mid-60s, always wore a long housecoat with faded floral patterns and had a little mutt named Togo that barked at everything, including its own reflection in the elevator door. I ran into her on a Monday morning as I was heading out. She was coming up from the laundry room, hauling a plastic basket and breathing like she'd just finished a marathon. I offered to help her with the last flight of stairs, and she accepted without much resistance. As we reached the third-floor landing, I said something offhand about the place across from me, 3B. Your neighbor seems like a quiet guy, I said. Mrs. Dirin stopped. Not slowed, stopped. 1 foot still on the top step. Who? She asked, almost too quickly. Mr. Volkov, I said. Lives in 3B. She squinted at the door, then looked back at me with a mix of confusion and something else. Hesitation, maybe? That apartment's been empty since before you moved in. I laughed a little, thinking she was joking. No, he's there. We've spoken a few times. She shook her head. I've been here 12 years. Last tenant in 3B died in, 2011? Young guy. Overdose, I think. They cleaned it out, sealed it up, and it's been vacant ever since. I stood there, basket still in my arms, suddenly too aware of how quiet the hallway was. There's someone in there, I said. I talked to him. He knows things about my place. Told me about the door lock. He asks questions. He's there. She didn't respond right away. Then she took her laundry back with a stiff little nod and muttered, You should talk to the landlord. I watched her disappear down the hallway. Then I looked back at 3B. The door looked the same as always. But now it seemed blank. Too clean. Like it had been painted over one too many times. There was no name on the slot. No scuff marks. Nowhere on the handle. I tried to shake it off. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the place was rented quietly, or short-term. Maybe there was a roommate she hadn't seen. Maybe. But that unease was crawling into the base of my neck. That night, I lay in bed listening to the faint creaks and pops of the old building. And I started to realize something. I had never heard a sound from that apartment. No footsteps. No water running. No life at all. The next day, I went downstairs and waited until I saw the building manager unlocking the supply closet by the boiler room. His name was Edward, tall, thick guy, always looked like he hadn't fully dried off from a shower. Smelled faintly of cigarettes and radiator dust. "Hey," I said. "You got a second?" He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "You having trouble again with the radiator?" "No, nothing like that," I said. "I just had a question about tenants." He gave me a look. Not suspicious, but guarded. "I live in 3C. Across from 3B. He nodded slowly. "Okay. I've spoken with the guy who lives there a few times, thin man, gray hair, sweater, calm voice. Name's Volkov. I stopped, unsure how to phrase it without sounding like I was accusing him of something. Edward's brow furrowed. "There's no one in 3B. "What?" He stood straighter, arms crossed. 3B's empty. Has been for years. We had a few offers, but none of them went through. Paperwork issues. No one's renting it right now. Hasn't been touched in a long time." I just stood there, processing. "I've spoken to him. A few times." Edward scratched his chin, then shrugged. "Look, I'm not saying you didn't see someone. Maybe a guest from another floor, maybe someone got confused about the layout. I don't know. But the key for 3B hasn't left the office in 2 years. You don't think someone could have, I don't know, gotten somehow? Doors are locked. Sealed. I checked them. Then who the hell have I been talking to?" I asked, voice getting sharper than I meant. He held up a hand, like he was trying to keep things cool. "Listen, man. This building's old. Creaks, leaks, and sometimes people see things, you know? Shadows. Movement. Tricks of the light. I'm not calling you crazy. I'm saying it happens." I left it there. What was I supposed to say? I walked back up the stairs with my ears ringing and that crawling feeling back in my chest. When I reached the 3rd floor, I stood in front of 3B. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a crack in the door. A whisper. The faint smell of cologne. Something. But there was nothing. The door just stared back at me like a closed eye. I became obsessed with the hallway. Not all at once, just a few stolen glances at first. Then longer. Then hours. I started leaving my door open when I was home, just slightly ajar so I could see the frame of 3B across from mine. A sliver of metal, a shadow cast by bad lighting, that was all I had to work with. I kept hoping to hear him. Or see him. Something I could point to and say, "See? I'm not crazy." But nothing. 3 days passed. I barely slept. I worked from home, laptop open but untouched, waiting for the slightest noise from the hall. I even set up my phone to record video during the day, pointed straight at the door. All I caught was silence. Stillness. But on the 4th night, just after midnight, I heard the soft sound of movement. Not footsteps. Something slower. Like cloth brushing against paint. A whisper of motion. I got up, eased my door open. The hallway was dim. The overhead bulb had gone into that slow, rhythmic flicker again, casting long shadows and making everything look underwater. 3B's door was cracked open maybe an inch. A faint light glowed inside. Same warm yellow tone as always. I stepped into the hall and stood perfectly still. Every hair on my arm stood on end, my chest felt tight, and there was a distinct, coppery tang in the air, like old coins pressed into the back of my tongue. Then I heard him. "Late again," he said, voice calm, like he was finishing a thought. "You always come when the shadows are longest." I didn't respond. Couldn't. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in my body refused to move. Like it knew not to speak. His silhouette appeared behind the doorframe. Not his whole face, just part of it. One eye, one side of his mouth. A sliver of a man. He looked the same. But not. Like a photograph developed a few degrees too dark. He smiled, and for the first time, I didn't feel politeness in it. I felt hunger. I took a step back, into my own doorway. and he whispered, "You shouldn't look at things that aren't yours to see." Then the door closed. No slam. No noise. Just closed. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't move. I didn't even shut my door. I just sat there in the dark, watching his door. Waiting for it to open again. It didn't. By now I was unraveling, and I knew it. I couldn't keep telling myself this was just stress, or overwork, or some half-baked psychological spiral. I had seen him. Talked to him. I had smelled his cologne. There was nothing imagined about that. So I invited someone over. My friend Tom. Old college buddy, skeptical type, the kind of guy who trusts facts and footage more than feelings. If I was losing my grip, I figured he'd tell me, probably with too much honesty and a beer in hand. He showed up Friday night with a six-pack and his usual smirk. "All right," he said, tossing his coat over the arm of the chair. "Show me your ghost neighbor." I didn't laugh. I filled him in. Everything. From the moment I met Volkov to the flickering lights, the dream, the hallway whispers. I could see him wanting to poke holes in it, to make a joke, but something about the way I said it must have settled into him differently. "So," he said finally, "we just wait for him." I nodded. "He usually appears late." We left my door cracked and sat across from it, beers untouched. The hallway light flickered once. Then again. It got late. After 1 a.m., I started to feel like maybe nothing would happen. Maybe I'd imagined it after all. Maybe. But then Tom sat up straighter. "Someone's there." He pointed toward the gap under the door of 3B. I looked. A shadow moved across the light. Just a slow pass, like someone walking from one side of the room to the other. No sound. No creak of the floor. Then the door opened. Wide. For the first time. Volkov stood there. Same slacks. Same beige sweater. Only now, his hands weren't behind his back. They hung at his sides, loose still. And he looked right at Tom. "Not yours," he said. Tom blinked. "Excuse me?" Volkov tilted his head. Not curious, measuring. "This moment. Not yours. You weren't invited." He stepped back into the apartment, and the door began to swing shut behind him. Tom stood up fast. "Hey! Wait, what the hell does that mean?" He crossed the hallway in 2 long strides and yanked the door open. The apartment was dark. Not dim, black. No light. No glow. Nothing. Just cold, dead air. And no one inside. No furniture. No rug. No smell. No sign that anyone had ever lived there. Just a bare, dusty room with peeling wallpaper and a broken blind hanging limp over a single cracked window. Tom stepped back. "What the fuck?" he whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, I saw real fear in his face. We stood in silence for a long time. And then he said the one thing I hadn't said out loud yet. "There's no one there." He was just gone. After Tom left, I didn't sleep. He didn't say much when he was walking out. Just kept shaking his head and muttering, "No way. That was a trick. A setup or…" I don't know, man. But the way his hands trembled when he reached for the doorknob said more than his mouth ever would. I sat up all night at my desk, staring at my phone, the one I'd left recording again. I didn't want to watch it, but I had to. I needed proof. Something to pin this all on. Something to rewind. Something real. At around 1:14 a.m. on the footage, the door to 3B opens. And Mr. Volkov steps into the frame. It's him. Just like I remember, same sweater, same slow gait, hands behind his back. He turns his head. Looks straight into the camera. Like he knows it's there. Then he smiles. Only the footage flickers. Just once. And for exactly 3 frames, barely a tenth of a second, his face changes. Not morphs, not melts. Just shifts. Like the shadows fell wrong, like his features were almost human but slightly reassembled. His mouth was too wide. The eyes too far apart. His smile looked like it had been drawn on, with just a bit too much pressure. Then the picture snaps back, and he turns and walks into his apartment. But on the video, the door never closes. It just cuts. As if that part of the tape wasn't there. 1 second, he's walking in. The next, it jumps to 20 minutes later. Nothing but hallway. I must have watched that clip 24 times. Every time, the glitch hit the same frame. Every time, his eyes felt like they were tracking me through the screen. I sent it to Tom. He didn't reply for 2 days. When he finally did, it was a single line. Delete that shit. Seriously. I didn't. I still have it. Some nights, I think about sending it to the police. Or uploading it somewhere. But a part of me knows it wouldn't work. They'd just see static. Or nothing at all. The world doesn't want to see him. And I think he likes it that way. The local library still had a microfiche machine. I didn't think those things existed outside of movies, but the woman at the desk didn't even flinch when I asked. Just pointed me to a corner near the back, past the water-stained ceiling tiles and the smell of old glue. I started with property records. Building history. Anything that might mention apartment 3B or the name Volkov. The records were dense, poorly scanned paper trails, handwritten notes from decades ago, grainy copies of copies. But I was patient. I'd already stopped sleeping through the night anyway. The building had been constructed in 1951. Nothing particularly special about it. Owned by the city until 1974, then sold to a private company, which sold it again in the early 2000s. Normal turnover. Names, leases, repairs, permits. But apartment 3B? Never leased under the name Volkov. Not once. I found other names, one of them matching what Mrs. Diran said. A man in his 20s, overdosed in 2011. Officially listed as unattended death. The file said, no next of kin. His name wasn't Volkov either. There was nothing else. No mention of anyone even similar to the man I'd been talking to for weeks. I called the city records office. Asked if they had any listings for a Pavel Volkov at this address or anywhere nearby. They asked me to spell it. Then again. Finally, the woman on the line said, we've got a few Volkovs in the county registry, but none at that building. You said apartment 3B? That unit's been unoccupied since 2011. Says right here sealed. Sealed? Yep. Code issue. Mold or something. Never reopened. I hung up. When I got back to the apartment that night, I stood in front of 3B with a stack of papers in my hands and an ache behind my eyes. Then I knocked. I don't know why I did it. But I knocked. Once. Twice. Nothing. Just when I turned to go, I heard the soft click of the latch. The door creaked open maybe half an inch. And from the dark inside I heard his voice. You're looking in the wrong places. That was it. The door stayed cracked open until I walked away. When I checked back an hour later, it was shut again. The next time I saw him was in the stairwell. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and damp again, same kind of day as when I first moved in. I was taking out some trash I should have gotten rid of days earlier, and there he was. Standing one landing below, half lit by the window above him. Same sweater. Same posture. But his hands, they weren't behind his back anymore. They were at his sides, curled slightly inward. Not clenched, not relaxed. Like he was waiting to catch something. Mr. Clark? He said, voice smooth as ever. You've been busy. I swallowed. I've been looking. He nodded, as if that was expected. Curiosity is a need, not a choice. The mind must fill its gaps, even if the cost is comprehension. I didn't know how to respond. It felt like he was quoting something that didn't exist. You've read the records? He asked. I have. I said. You're not in them. He smiled. Of course not. Do you leave footprints in a house that doesn't belong to you? He took a step closer. I never told you my name, he said. I nodded slowly. No. You didn't. He leaned slightly forward, not enough to feel threatening, just enough to pull me into his voice. I want to ask you something now. That stopped me. All right, I said. He looked up at the ceiling as if listening for something, then back to me. When you walk down your hallway at night, do you ever get the feeling your footsteps aren't the only ones you hear? My throat tightened. I didn't answer. Sometimes, Mr. Clark, we are not alone. And sometimes, we were never meant to be. His eyes held me there, calm and unblinking. Do you remember the door to your childhood bedroom? He asked suddenly. What? The way it creaked. The way it didn't quite close all the way. The way the darkness never quite stayed on the other side. My stomach flipped. I hadn't thought about that door in years. He smiled again. Good. That's where it began. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but he was already turning. Climbing the stairs slowly, heading back toward his apartment. Only he didn't go inside. He walked past 3B. And disappeared into the far end of the hallway, where there isn't a door. Just a blank stretch of wall. I went to the landlord again. Edward wasn't in the office, so I called instead. Left a message. Then 2. Then 5. No reply. So I did what I shouldn't have done. I broke into 3B. The door wasn't locked. I know how that sounds, but I swear, when I turned the handle, it just opened. No resistance. No creak. Like it had been waiting. Inside, the apartment was as empty as I remembered. Bare floorboards, dry air, dust coating everything like frost. No furniture. No signs of anyone living there. No scent of cologne. No warmth. Just that wrong quiet. But this time I didn't leave. I walked the whole space, my boots echoing with each step. Something about the acoustics felt off. The room was dead silent, but my footfalls rang too long, like sound had nowhere to go. In the far wall of the living room, just to the left of the boarded-up window, I noticed something. The plaster was new. Not fresh new, just newer than the rest. No cracks, no discoloration. A patch maybe 6 feet high for wide. Smoothed over too perfectly. I knocked. It sounded hollow. I stood there a long time. Then I went back to my apartment and grabbed the small claw hammer I'd used when assembling my shelves. I chipped the first layer off slowly. Carefully. Then deeper. Beneath the plaster, I found old wood. Rotting in places. Splintered in others. And beneath that, a seam. A hidden door. No knob. No frame. Just a rectangular outline, like someone had sealed it shut decades ago. There were scratch marks around the edges. Fingernails, I think. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing. Then I pressed my palm flat against the center, and I felt it. Not movement. Not sound. Just a presence. Like someone was standing on the other side of the door, breathing. Slowly. Waiting. I backed away. My whole body was shaking, not from fear, but from some deeper instinct, something ancient that lives in the bones. That thing you feel when you know you're being watched, even when your eyes tell you otherwise. I didn't go further. I resealed the wall the best I could. Covered it with an old drop cloth. Locked the front door of 3B behind me. That night I sat in my bed and listened. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow. Careful. Passing my door. Then stopping. Right outside. And then, from the other side of the wood. I was never in the apartment, Mr. Clark. Silence. Then the footsteps faded, and the light in the hallway flickered out completely. I didn't leave my apartment the next day. I didn't answer calls. I didn't eat. I just sat by the peephole, staring across at 3B, waiting. At 11:42 p.m., the hallway light came on by itself. He was already there. Standing outside my door, facing me. Not moving. Not blinking. Not knocking. Just waiting. I opened the door slowly. My hand trembled on the knob. He stepped back half a pace, enough to give me space. Always polite. Did you see it? He asked. I didn't answer. You opened a door that was closed for a reason, he said. You brought your questions into a room that was built to forget. I managed to whisper. What are you? He tilted his head, just slightly, like he always did when weighing a thought. You think I'm a man? A ghost? A leftover story? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm not what you see. I'm just what's left. Of what? He leaned forward. His voice lowered, not threatening, but tired. Like something old that had been waiting too long. There was someone here once. Long ago. Before leases. Before tiles. Before pipes and plaster. He lived in the corner of the room you chipped open. He lived in the spaces people don't measure. I tried to step back, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. He was forgotten, Volkov said. And so he became forgetting. The echo instead of the voice. The quiet after the cry. His eyes darkened. But people kept coming. Building. Living. Leaving. He took one step closer. So now I speak with them. Just one at a time. Just long enough. Until they start seeing the seams in things. I finally found my voice. Why me? You were quiet, he said. And you listened. Then his tone changed. Softer. You have a choice now, Mr. Clark. You can leave. Walk away. Forget all of this. Or, you can open the door again. See what I've spent years keeping inside. A long silence stretched between us. And then he said the last thing I expected. If you choose to forget me, I'll go. I stared at him. His face. His clothes. His shape. I tried to remember every detail, to burn it into my mind. But even as I looked, it began to fade. Like smoke. He was disappearing. Like he'd never been there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark with all the lights off, phone off, blinds drawn, every crack in my apartment sealed as tightly as I could manage. But it didn't matter. His voice was still in my head. That choice he offered. It wasn't a threat. That's what made it worse. I could forget him. And he would go. Or I could open the door again. And see. I didn't decide, not consciously. Around 4 a.m., I found myself standing in front of 3B again, keyless, empty-handed, barefoot. I hadn't even realized I'd left my apartment. But there I was, hard hammering like it was trying to burst through my ribs. The door was unlocked. Inside was cold. Not temperature cold, empty cold. The kind you feel when a room has been without breath for far too long. I walked across the living room floor to the cloth I'd hung over the patched wall. I pulled it down. The false wall stared back at me. The hidden door. Still sealed. Still waiting. I placed my hand against it. The wood was warm. Then, slowly, it began to open, inward. It didn't swing on hinges. It peeled back, like paper curling from fire. The smell was immediate, damp earth, copper, mildew, and something faintly sweet beneath it all. Something old and rotting and still alive. Inside was not another room. It was a narrow corridor of stone. The walls were wrong, angled like they'd been carved by hands without symmetry. The floor dipped in places. The ceiling was too low. And along the walls, scratched into the stone, were names. Hundreds. All first names. Some familiar. Some forgotten. Some too smudged to read. I looked for mine. It wasn't there. Not yet. Then I heard it again. His voice. Only now it was everywhere. In the walls. In my skull. You chose to remember. I turned back. The apartment behind me was gone. Only the corridor remained. And the door had sealed behind me. They'll say I moved out. They'll say I vanished. Maybe someone else will rent 3C one day and talk about the smell. The flickering light. The man in the beige sweater. Maybe they'll knock. And maybe he'll answer. But me? I'm still walking. Downward. Because there are more names ahead. And now I understand what he was. He wasn't a ghost. He was a guide. And there's more beneath us than we're meant to remember.